I actually remember writing my first song, I was quite young, in bed one day. I was lying in bed just before I went to school and I started to hum some melody and some lyrics, I can't remember what. It was a song, you know, it had a beginning and a middle and an end. But I didn't really get a sort of serious idea that that's what you could do in reality until, I suppose, the Beatles. Because before that, songs were written, seemed to be written in some fantasy land called America, you know, which I wasn't quite sure existed except in film. And it was the Beatles who actually brought the fact home that you could come from a northern English city and come from terraced housing and actually be able to write songs that the world would relate to and sing with you. And I suppose that gave me and most of my generation the same idea, that we could actually do it. Before we formed the Police in '76, I was a songwriter. I had a publishing deal with a big publishing house in London. I'd written songs for previous bands before, and I felt that was what I did. That singing was a sort of byproduct of having to sell your song. If you wrote a song, you had to sell it to the other musicians, the rest of the band. You know, a lot of the songs from the first two albums of the Police were written before for other entities, not the Police. And then I tailored the songs to fit that band and what was happening. But a good proportion of those songs were written before the Police ever formed, or we'd even met. As a group, you know, I mean, the three of us had pretty strong egos, and I think that added up to a certain energy that people kind of got taken in by, you know, knocked over by. Well, you know, we were old-fashioned in that respect, and that we believed in touring, doing hard work. You know, that wasn't the age of the video. You couldn't make a video and be a star the next week. You know, you had to go out and you had to gig in Holland and Belgium and France and Germany and, you know, clubs in Britain and everywhere. Clubs in the US, and so we did that. We put all the groundwork in. But you know, there's something about that creates backbone, it creates resilience, and I think that was part of our success, and that we weren't just a flash in the pan. You know, we'd actually put the work in. Everybody who heard Roxanne said that's a hit, and we got a deal based on that one song. Our manager at the time, Miles Copeland, took one song into the record company and they signed us. I mean, they only signed us for a single deal, but everybody who heard it thought they'd heard something unique and something they hadn't heard before. I mean, there were elements they'd heard before, but they'd never heard it quite put together in that very strange way. It was kind of an eccentric record. And at the time, when it was played on the radio, it stuck out like a sore thumb, you know. I was like, wow. Especially in America at the time, and it was a huge hit in America, against all the odds. If I have a profession I'm proud to belong to, a craft, if you like, a craft union, it's that of a songwriter. And the Ivor Novello Awards is an important one, because it's judged by your peers as songwriters. People who've written hits, you know, in the past, not just last year, but 20 years, 30 years. Songwriters of long standing. So to win the Songwriter of the Year award is important. It's linked to sales. It's not particularly linked to quality, I'll have to admit that. But I've won it a few times. So I figure that you can, you know, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you know, to consistently go back and be awarded in that milieu is, I think, pretty significant. So I get a lot of pride from having those things. I think I've got about 7 of them in a row, you know, on my mantelpiece. I say I enjoy having these awards. I don't judge myself by them. They're fun, but you know, they're not really a way of judging your life or valuing your life at all. Did they give me confidence? I didn't lack for confidence, I have to tell you that. I was a very confident man. I'll be the first to admit there's nothing in every breath you take that's particularly original. The chord sequence is dead ordinary. It's a major chord followed by a relative minor chord. The lyrics you could get out of a rhyming dictionary. It's basically Moon and June. The melody, particularly great. The bridge just goes to a standard place, you know, it goes to F major to a G. And yet there's something quite unique about it. I think what it is a mood, in that all of those ingredients, which are very recognizable, are put together in a way that is very ambiguous and ambivalent. Because some people see that song as being very romantic and very seductive. And other people hear the song and think, God, it's really about control and it's quite sinister. And the fact is, it's about both of those things. And this was written at the time of Reagan's America, you know, of the first genesis of Star Wars. We would protect you, you know, and that's kind of seductive too, you know. So in a way, it was a song of the times, you know. It was just coming up to 1984, George Orwell's prophetic year, you know, and the police were at their height of their power, and a lot of people have memories. Some people still get married to that song, which kind of fills me with horror. But it was, you know, it was also about my first marriage, my marriage that broke up, that I would consider the only failure of my life, you know, the only regret of my life. And so the song has a lot of latent emotional power, even though it's not terribly original. Oh, I saw that album, the Synchronicity album, as being the last time I would go through that process of being in this seeming democracy. I wanted total freedom to write whatever songs came into my head without having to tailor it for the needs of that trio, which I found very limiting at that point. As grateful as I was for having been in the band, as proud as I am of that band, it was essentially a trap. You know, I was asked the other week, I was in Lithuania, and they said to me, why did you leave the police? And I said, well, why did you leave the Soviet Union? And they said, we understand. You know, it was the same kind of oppressive. And I'm not saying I wasn't the creator of this. You know, I was part of this thing, but I needed to escape. I needed to breathe new air, you know. Even though we were huge, and people had that epithet that we were the biggest band in the world at the time, or whatever that means. It's meaningless, but, you know, you can't leave this band. People told me I couldn't leave my job when I left teaching, you know, I'd lose my pension. That's what they said. So I'm not terribly sentimental or afraid of change. I decided to leave the police the night of Shea Stadium. It was probably our biggest gig, you know, the apotheosis of bigness, you know, it was a huge amount of people and exposure and everything. And I thought after this, everything's just diminishing returns, you know. I spoke to the other guys, I said, we can't just keep doing this, it's boring, you know, it'll get boring, we'll hate it. They agreed. And it was that point I started to think about how I would carry on. And I did go back to New York after the tour ended, and I started to court a number of jazz players who I liked very much, Branford Marsalis being the main one, and Kenny Kirkland, the keyboard player. And watch them play, and we'd talk music, and convince them that they could still keep their jazz credentials and work with me at the same time. I lied, of course, because as soon as they started to work with me, people got very kind of snooty about, you know, you can't play jazz and work with Sting at the same time. But, you know, it's in the nature of music to become ghettoized, you know, and part of my whole rationale is to try and de-ghettoize it and say, well, it's just music, you know, whatever you call it, it's still the same language we're speaking, you know, there's still the same communication we're trying to make, whatever the name is. So that worked, you know. I formed this band called the Blue Turtles, and we made that album, The Dream of the Blue Turtles, and it was very much a songwriter's record in that I had total freedom to put any kind of song down I liked, you know, whether it was a kind of soul song or a kind of cabaret kind of song. It was just me kind of just flexing my wings and saying, hey, these are songs, a bunch of songs. But I didn't feel at all constricted by it. I felt I could do anything. I wrote that in the garden in my home in England. I just hit on this melody. I was walking around and I had this, and that line came at the same time as the melody, as all the best ones do. You know, the melody writes the lyrics. And I thought, I recognize that. That sounds to me like people are going to like that. So I ran back to the studio before I forgot it, and I worked it out on the piano, and I kept singing it, and got my wife in, you know, who's very honest with me. If I have a crap idea, she tells me it's a crap idea. I say, listen to this. She said, oh, that sounds nice. So, okay, I got her, you know, imprimatur to carry on. So I carried on and I wrote that song. And it was basically about, I suppose, that my relationship with Trudy. You know, she is the girder of my life. You know, she's absolutely rock solid. And if everything else can fall by the wayside, everything, you know, the world can collapse, but that relationship is the one thing that keeps me going and surviving and living. I don't think it was ever reflected in my work. I never wrote about the environment. I never wrote about the degradation of, you know, the planet, or I never wrote really about human rights. But those things were part of me, you know, and I think it made me a more rounded person, a more complete person. Because if your job is to write songs, you're writing about your experience of life. The more experiences you've had, the richer your songwriting will be, even if you don't use those events as subject matter. You know, I'm very fortunate in that because of my life, I'm allowed into situations that a normal person wouldn't be privy to. For example, I think in the middle of the 80s, I was in Brazil. I was playing a gig in Brazil, and some guy said to me, do you want to go into the interior? And at the time, it was nobody went into the interior. No Brazilians ever went into the interior, you know, except crazy, you know, gold prospectors and wackos. I was taken in there and spent some time with some people there, and they told me their story. You know, I could see very clearly what was happening. That you know, progress was encroaching on this amazing forest. And it's called progress, but it's actually destruction. It's just coming, you know, if you fly over on a plane, it's mile after mile after mile of desert, and then this wonderful jungle. And they asked me to help them. So I said, I'm not sure how I can do that except by using my celebrity to allow, you know, one of you to tell your story. So I took this guy called Rowney, who was an Indian chief of the Kayapo around the world, and he's an extraordinary man, very, very charismatic, impassioned man, and he had this wonderful plate in his lower lip. He was a real tough character. Took him around the world, and we met the Pope of Rome, and we met the King of Spain, and the Prime Minister of Australia, and he would go on the Terry Wogan show, and he'd tell his story. I was just there as the mascot, you know, I was the entree. But we eventually created an infrastructure, a legal infrastructure for him to protect this piece of land of his the size of Belgium, I think. Maybe the Irish Republic. It's kind of a big piece of land. Anyway, we protected it legally. And that took about 7 years of work and raising funds. And then that became a model for different parts of the Amazon and also different parts of the world. You know, in Thailand, for example, in Madagascar, this model is being set up everywhere. I'm not a historian or a commentator. I'm very fortunate that what I've decided to write in my career has largely coincided with popular taste. I'm a popular songwriter. Maybe one day it won't. I'm perfectly prepared to accept that too, but it has, and you know, I work hard, and I'm very grateful. That's all I can say. This tour has lasted almost 2 years. It's the longest one I ever did. It's 285 shows, this being the 281st. And I'm knackered, completely knackered. At the same time, I'm really galvanized by its success and how many people we played to, like 2.7 million people. And every country, we've been at 60 countries. Every country we've been to, they may start off in a characteristic way. You know, the Germans are like this, and the Italians are like this, but they always end up in the same place. They always end up appreciating it, and nobody asks for their money back, and I'm happy. Because of this tour, the record company was saying, well, you know, you've got to release some of these live tapes you have. And I said, well, you can't really recapture an event. You know, there's a lot of stuff, even though it's on tape, there's a lot missing. It's too big, you know, it's too big to go on a CD. I'd much rather take the band somewhere intimate and small and play quietly and reinterpret some of the songs. Make it more personal, more intimate, a little bit of value added. So they're getting something that I haven't seen on a concert. They're getting something that's much more like a love letter, you know, saying, this is for you.